African Liberation Day is promoted as a time when all blacks around the world should come together to fight racism and join in the quest for political, economic, and social justice. For the past 41 years, Detroit has been the site of African Liberation Day events that commemorate the struggles and progress of African people. This year's celebration takes place over the weekend of May 23rd at the Charles H. Wright Museum. The festivities include a march, a rally, speakers, entertainment, scholarship presentations, and an African marketplace. Joining me now to talk about this historical tradition is the co-chair of the African Liberation Day Planning Committee, Greg McKenzie. Welcome to American Black Journal.
Thank you.
That sounds like quite a menu of events that you have going. You guys have a little bit of everything going.
It's going to be a very busy event.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But first, let's talk about this African Liberation Day. I'm not sure most people know what that is, where it comes from, and why we talk about it.
Well, African Liberation Day really has its basis in the slave trade and then the subsequent abolition of slavery and the 1884 Berlin Conference, where the European powers involved in the slave trade began carving up Africa and then ushered
for colonization,
colonial period. And then based upon that, you know, the need for liberation obviously arose, and through the years, liberation struggles from Marcus Garvey's Pan-African movement to eventually in the 50s culminating with Kwame Nkrumah and the liberation of Ghana and other leaders, Sekou Touré, Guinea, and the list goes on. But simultaneously, the civil rights movement in the United States was taking foot, and so people began a re-identification with Africa and African people, and those struggles kind of alongside each other, the same momentum, the same energy, you know, people moving in the same direction.
And why is it at this time of year that we celebrate
basically the conference, or let me get it right, the African Liberation Day Coordinating Committee for the United States did the first African Liberation Day May 27th, 1972. And they do it in May because the Organization of African Unity that came together after those African nations were becoming liberated started in May.
Okay, well that makes sense. And then talk to me about why we have such a celebration here in Detroit. I would imagine I could go to other cities and not find quite as much going on.
Well, and you know, basically throughout the years, it first started in San Francisco and Washington, D.C., you had 60,000 plus people. So Detroit being a city that's predominantly African-American, the very next year was in the African Liberation Day movement, and they had a huge celebration here, and there was a tremendous amount of support for the African liberation struggles from those people involved in that community here.
So talk to me more about this year's event.
So this year, African Liberation Day ALD 2K14, we have an exciting lineup. It's May 23rd, Friday evening, starting with our keynote speaker, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, author of the ISIS Papers and pioneer of African-centered clinical psychiatry. She's going to be joining us to give us a lecture and a question-and-answer session. And then on Saturday, we're going to have, starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, the events go from 10 to 5. So starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, we'll have the Cass Tech Marching Band leading the march around the grounds of the museum. We'll go back inside the museum. The curator will give us a brief tour of this genealogy room and talk to us in depth about that, give us some highlights of places we should go and check out inside the museum. And then around 12 o'clock sharp, the program will be getting started. And we'll start off with honoring our ancestors, particularly Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, Bishop Nkenji Abi of the Shrine of the Black Madonna, Lisa Tate of our Kibalan Village and Inner City Sub-Center, and Catherine Blackwell of the Blackwell Institute. And we'll give plaques to representatives of their family for their body of work and let the people know what they've done.
So and you do this every year. About how many people usually show up for this?
Well, it's been done for the last 41 years, and I say in the latter years or the more recent years, the attendance has fallen off somewhat. And I represent sort of the passing of the baton, because as the African Liberation Day celebration has continued through the years, some of the fire and the momentum kind of waned off. But infusing youth energy into it this year. We're back with a re-energized African Liberation Day. We anticipate upwards of 200, 300 attendees.
Yeah, very good. And talk to me about tying this whole idea of African liberation to what goes on today. I would think that for young people especially, that's the key, getting them to understand what that has to do with what they're dealing with now.
And that's the difficult connection to make. This year's theme is African unity in the diaspora. And so the ideal is that if we can start to understand how this impacts us economically, if African people can work together globally,
right,
then we could create some more institutions and economic opportunities for our communities and change some of our living conditions. And so that's where the connection has to be made, in the fact that it can be an economic impact positively.
Right. What about schools? I mean, I would imagine that getting into the schools, getting into the curriculum to let people know that this happened, that this is happening, and that they can take part is pretty critical too.
Absolutely. And generally in the past we were focusing on the African-centered schools, and many of those have since closed.
There are not many left, right?
No, not many at all. So, but we have a great staff of people working with our committee, got the word out and spread it around as far and as wide as we could. In fact, that's how we're here today, and so we're very thankful for that.
Yeah. Tell me what you see here in Detroit that you feel like connects really directly to something like the idea of African liberation.
Well, here in Detroit, you have a very large community of individuals who have a commitment to their heritage and a pride in their heritage as African descendants. And so as a result of that, a day like this gives them an opportunity to come out,
sort of show that off, right?
Yeah, like a peacock, and strut their feathers. And so I often tell people when I'm talking to them about African Liberation Day, do you like the African World Festival? And before I had a conscious bone in my body or knew anything about my heritage, I was a regular attendee of the African World Festival. And so I know that people can relate to that. And when I say that to them, they say, yeah. I said, well, then you'll love African Liberation Day. Make sure that you come down.
Make sure you come down.
Absolutely. And the other thing is we want to encourage everybody who comes to support. We're in partnership this year with the Charles H. Wright Museum.
Right.
So we want to encourage everybody who comes to African Liberation Day to renew your membership. If you don't have one, get one.
Get one.
And if you can afford to, make a longer commitment, a lifetime or whatever you can do, because, you know, obviously the right is very important to our community.
Yeah, right. And that connection with the right is critical to this day.
Absolutely.
The whole idea of the right is not just African American history, but how that ties to Africa.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
What in the future do you see the sort of possibility to expand this? We've got about a minute left, but is this going anywhere else?
Absolutely. Definitely my agenda, as you said, how do we connect this to young people and how does this relate now? Next year, I envision African Liberation Day being about economic empowerment, bringing in maybe a Dr. Claude Anderson and making a summit that puts serious investigation into how do we create economic sustainable situations.
Yeah, opportunity.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, well, that's a critical part of what we need here in Detroit. Well, good luck with the festival.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.